Okay, so in this video I'm going to talk about PostTrans template structure for importing multiple transactions. I'm going to show it working with Xero, but the principle's the same for Sage 250 and any other accounts package we write in the future. Here I am on my PostTrans toolbar, and I'm going to click on examples, and I'm going to pull through, I think, this inclusive VAT tax example. Now, if you've watched the previous video, we saw that basically there's a lot of header tags in row 28 above row 27. Row 27 does actually have a purpose, which will be covered in the clear video. And we had loads of mappings. But in this video, all we have in the top is a couple of defaults. So the defaults are, we're actually bringing in with payment here. So this is various transactions with payment, inclusive of VAT, tax, or whatever you want to call it in your own. In fact, if we go to setup, we'll see defaults. There we go, inclusive tax, search by name, all the rest of it. But the point is there's only 4 header values, because a lot of the header values can be pushed down into the lines, which we'll see in a minute. Let's just discuss those defaults. Because we're importing a payment, we need a default bank account that we're going to bring those payments into. We also need to specify the status as authorized, because Xero will not put a payment against an invoice unless it's been authorized. And we also have 2 nominals for purchase or sales to fall back upon. It's just a requirement we need just in case it's not set in any of the settings in Xero, as in not on the product or the account code, etc. Now we can see we've previously posted this. We've got some transaction information here. I'm just going to delete that. So what do we got below? Okay, so the tags in row 28 define the mappings to whatever accounts package we're using, in this case Xero. So in column B we have the transaction date, and you can see there that that tag is prefixed with TH because it's a transaction header, isn't it? Transaction date. Plus then we've got transaction type. Now we could have, if we were all bringing in invoices, we could have put that in the header and just denoted that in the header. But if we're bringing in, say, from a text file, we might want the ability to bring in credit notes. Now we can see there's a code with a comma after it. PostTrans will ignore the comma and everything after it. This is all to do with in-cell searching. But if you were bringing in from a separate text file, you'd only need SISC in that column as the value. Next, we've got the contact name. Now, Xero is a bit strange, really, because older traditional account systems such as Sage 50 and 200, they use account codes, always. Everything's account code. But in Xero, hey, you don't have to have account codes. You can use the name. In which case, I think PostTrans uses several different ways of matching the contact. If the account code isn't given, then it will match by the company contact name. If the account code is given, then it will take precedence over contact name. And there's also another thing called contact code in Xero, which you can't edit in the system. I think the idea of it is that a lot of people use it with external web carts that can just interface into it magically. And obviously that cart knows the contact as a different entity, so it needs an ID. So that's always written into the contact number, but we can forget that. That's not that important. But also over here we've actually got the account code, so we have actually specified the account code in this example. Of course, you could rearrange these columns. Given the account code, I wouldn't need the rest of the contact information. But one thing this sheet does allow you to do, and at present we haven't written this for the Sage implementation, but a change in address here gets pushed back to Xero. Anyway, moving along, we've got the reference, and next we've got the first piece of line information. So we've got invoice, its tax rate, the amount inclusive of tax, and the payment reference. So that's the payment reference that would appear on the statement for bank reconciliation purposes later on. Now, so PostTrans will scan down this sheet, importing those. So we've basically got all different dates and things. So that's basically representing 6 transactions. if the payment wasn't there, you can actually bring in multiple lines, and I think there's another example, there certainly will be another example, of being able to pull in multiple lines. And what PostTrans does is it scans down, and if it sees a different value of a transaction header, or obviously a type, or a contact, or a reference, it forces a new transaction. If this was all the same, and this said, I don't know, rent to, then that would they'll become a 2 transaction purchase invoice because it's PI there, and I believe it will add up the amount inclusive, so that would be, I don't know, 100 and 200 and 380 pounds, I believe, if my maths correct. So that's kind of how it works. Very clever system. So it ignores everything, it takes the last value it sees, and it detects those changes if those values change. So let's put it back to how it was. Anyway, we're going to import that. Let's press import. So now we're pressing OK, and now it's giving me a summary. So that's the first line we can see in there. And I can then, having looked at that, I could say, oh yeah, let's import that. And that's brought that in. So now we move to the second one. Now, once we're happy with the import, we might say, well, I don't want to see this confirmation anymore. So let's press post transaction. And everything's now gone into Xero. And what it does is, as it imports, it will cache up to 50 records, although it was creating contacts at the same time. But if the contacts exist, it will cache them in memory, so it will cache 50 invoices and then push them to Xero all in one go for optimal performance. So having done that, any column we see here with DBL on, we should be able to double click on and go straight into that contact within Xero. There we can see, oh, look, we can see the invoice we just pushed in against Bell Labs. And of course, if I double click on the, there we go, they're in the paid section, Bell Labs. So if I double click on Bell Labs, what was that, £120 sales, I just wrote invoice against it. The amount due is 0 because it's been paid off. There we go.